Professor Klix Vorthak adjusted his ceremonial teaching tentacles and gazed proudly across the pristine expanse of the Galactic University's physical education complex. As the most decorated fitness instructor in 3 spiral arms of the galaxy, he had trained everyone from the floating gas bags of Nebula Prime to the crystalline rockhoppers of Asteroid Belt 7. Today, however, marked the culmination of his illustrious career. "Welcome, my eager pupils, to advanced interspecies kinetics," Vorthak announced, his voice carrying the pompous authority of someone who had never met a challenge he couldn't theoretically overcome. "Today we shall demonstrate the fundamental principles of cross-species physical conditioning using a live subject from one of the galaxy's more primitive worlds." His 3 students arranged themselves in what passed for attention among their respective species. Jiffy, a hyperactive Chitakian who looked like someone had crossed a squirrel with a caffeinated lightning bolt, bounced excitedly on his haunches. His fur practically vibrated with anticipation. Ooh, Professor. Are we getting one of those scary Therakian war beasts? The ones with the poison spikes and the acid breath?" Jiffy chattered, his words coming out in rapid-fire bursts that would make an auctioneer jealous. Glob, a pessimistic blobarian whose gelatinous form rippled with perpetual anxiety, oozed forward slightly. "Knowing our luck, it'll probably be something that eats us. Everything in this program has tried to eat us at least once. Remember the carnivorous plants from Verdant 3? Hank, the 4-armed mechanoid whose chrome plating reflected the gymnasium's ambient lighting, began running rapid calculations through his neural processors. Statistical analysis indicates a 73.4% probability of bodily harm in today's exercise based on previous curriculum patterns. Should I activate my emergency backup systems?" Vorthak waved dismissively with 2 of his tentacles while preening with the other 4. "Nonsense, my mechanically minded friend. Today's subject comes from a backwater world called Earth. Humans, they call themselves. Barely discovered fire, relatively speaking. Still use primitive combustion engines and haven't even mastered basic gravity manipulation. The perfect specimen to demonstrate how superior conditioning techniques can elevate even the most rudimentary life forms." He pulled up a holographic display showing a standard human male. Observed the specimen. Bipedal, which is quaint but inefficient. Single heart, which seems like poor redundancy planning. No natural armor, weapons, or defensive capabilities to speak of. They don't even have proper tentacles or mandibles. Frankly, I'm amazed they survived long enough to develop space travel. The classroom door chimed and in walked Jake Martinez, a perfectly average human college student who had signed up for what he thought was just another gym credit to fulfill his graduation requirements. He was wearing standard Earth workout gear, a simple t-shirt and shorts combo that looked absurdly primitive next to the high-tech athletic wear of his alien classmates. "Hey there," Jake said with the casual friendliness that characterized his species, completely unaware that he had just stepped into what would become known throughout the galaxy as the Martinez incident. "I'm Jake. I was told this was some kind of fitness class. I've got to be honest, I'm not really much of an athlete, but I need the credits to graduate." Vorthak's confidence swelled to near bursting proportions. Here was the perfect opportunity to showcase his superior understanding of physical conditioning. This primitive human would serve as the ideal demonstration of how proper scientific methodology could transform even the most basic biological framework into something resembling actual fitness. "Excellent timing, human Jake," Vorthak announced grandly. "You shall be our willing participant in today's educational demonstration. We shall assess your current physical capabilities and then guide you through a properly structured exercise regimen designed by the finest kinetic theorists in the galaxy." Jake shrugged agreeably. "Sure thing, Professor. I should probably mention, though, I'm pretty out of shape. Haven't been to the gym in like a week." The 3 alien students exchanged glances that, across their various species, all conveyed the same basic sentiment of skeptical concern mixed with morbid curiosity. None of them could have predicted that this seemingly innocent exchange would trigger a chain of events that would fundamentally alter the galactic understanding of what constituted physical fitness. "Now then, human Jake," Professor Vorthak said, consulting his tablet with the confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with proper academic theory. "Let us begin with a standard assessment of your baseline physical capabilities. Perhaps you could demonstrate your species' equivalent of basic locomotion conditioning. Jake nodded and moved to an empty space on the gymnasium floor. Sure, I'll just do a quick warm-up. Nothing fancy. He began with what any human would recognize as perfectly normal jumping jacks. The effect on his alien audience was immediate and catastrophic. Jiffy's hyperactive bouncing stopped mid-bounce as his eyes went wide. Sweet nibbling neutrinos. Look at the ground displacement with each impact. The seismic readings alone should have triggered the emergency systems. Glob, whose gelatinous form had been maintaining a relatively stable shape, suddenly began wobbling uncontrollably. "This is how we die," he announced with his characteristic pessimism, though this time his voice carried a note of genuine terror. I knew this day would come. Crushed by a primitive bipe demonstrating basic calisthenics. Tink's forearms began frantically inputting calculations as his sensors went haywire. Error, does not compute. Biological organism generating kinetic force levels typically associated with industrial machinery. Requesting immediate recalibration of all measurement devices. Professor Vorthak watched in growing alarm as Jake continued his warm-up routine, completely oblivious to the panic he was causing. Each jumping jack sent small vibrations through the specially reinforced floor, vibrations that the gymnasium's safety sensors were interpreting as minor seismic events. Fascinating, Vorthak muttered, though his academic curiosity was rapidly being overtaken by a creeping sense that perhaps he had underestimated this particular specimen. Tell me, human Jake, is this considered strenuous activity by your species standards? Jake paused mid-jump, barely breathing hard. This? Nah, this is just to get the blood flowing. I was thinking I'd follow it up with a light jog around the track, maybe 5 or 6 miles to really get warmed up. The word miles meant nothing to the aliens, but Tink's universal translator helpfully converted the measurement, causing his optical sensors to flicker rapidly in what could only be described as mechanical distress. Requesting clarification, Tink stammered, his voice taking on the electronic equivalent of a quaver. Did the human just reference sustained locomotion across a distance of approximately 9.6 kilometers as a preliminary warm-up activity? That's right, Jake confirmed cheerfully. Though I should probably mention I'm pretty out of shape right now. Last month I was doing 10-mile runs pretty regularly, but I've been slacking lately. Blob's gelatinous mass began to ripple in patterns that suggested either laughter or a complete nervous breakdown. 16 kilometers. He's talking about 16 kilometers of sustained high-impact locomotion as a measure of being out of shape. We're not studying a primitive life form, we're documenting a biological weapon. Professor Vorthak, his academic pride warring with his growing realization that this situation was spiraling far beyond his expertise, decided to regain control by implementing what he considered a reasonable exercise protocol. Very well, human Jake. Let us proceed with a properly structured obstacle course designed according to galactic safety standards and optimal kinetic efficiency principles. The professor activated the gymnasium's automated setup system, and a course materialized that would have challenged most galactic athletes. There were precision balance beams 3 inches wide, moderate elevation climbing walls reaching heights of 4 feet, and endurance tunnels extending the grueling distance of 20 meters. Jake looked at the obstacle course for a long moment, his expression one of polite confusion. Is this like a kid's course or something? He asked with genuine curiosity. I mean, it looks fun, but I'm not sure how this is supposed to be exercise. My little nephew could probably handle most of this stuff. The silence that followed was the kind of profound quiet that usually precedes either enlightenment or catastrophe. Perhaps, Vorthak said slowly, his tentacles beginning to twitch with what observers would later identify as the first signs of his eventual complete psychological breakdown, but you could show us what you would consider an appropriate level of physical challenge. Jake's face lit up with enthusiasm. Oh, now we're talking. You want to see some real exercise? This is going to be fun. And that was the moment when 3 advanced alien civilizations simultaneously realized they had made a terrible, terrible mistake. Jake cracked his knuckles with a sound that made Tink's audio sensors recalibrate themselves automatically. Okay, if we're going to do this right, let me tell you about some actual human sports. Have you guys ever heard of football? The three alien students exchanged glances that transcended species barriers in their shared expression of mounting dread. Football involves a lot of running, jumping, and tackling, Jake continued conversationally. Basically, you try to carry a ball from one end of a field to the other, while a bunch of really big guys try to knock you down as hard as they can. Jiffy's hyperactive energy had been slowly draining throughout the conversation, and now he sat perfectly still for the first time since anyone had known him. They try to knock you down? On purpose? For fun? Oh yeah, it's great, Jake said with genuine enthusiasm. Though if you really want to see some intense stuff, you should check out rugby. That's like football, but with fewer rules and more teeth getting knocked out. Bob began what could only be described as a slow-motion panic attack, his gelatinous form rippling in increasingly agitated patterns. More teeth getting knocked out. He said more teeth getting knocked out like it was a selling point. Professor Vorthak, whose academic pride was still fighting a losing battle against his rapidly expanding understanding of human capabilities, decided to reassert his authority through scientific observation. Surely these activities you describe are ritualized combat between your species' warrior caste, he said with forced confidence. Standard humans like yourself would not participate in such extreme physical activities. Jake laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both completely innocent and absolutely terrifying to his alien audience. Warrior caste? Dude, I played JV football in high school. My mom made me quit because my grades were slipping, not because of the physical stuff. He paused thoughtfully. Actually, let me show you something basic. This is just a standard push-up. Pretty much every human can do these. Jake dropped to the floor and positioned himself in a standard push-up stance. The moment his hands made contact with the gymnasium floor, Tink's seismic sensors began registering readings that suggested either an approaching earthquake or the activation of heavy construction equipment. Beginning demonstration of primitive human conditioning exercise, Jake announced, and then proceeded to perform what he considered a perfectly ordinary push-up. The effect was immediate and campus-wide. Every seismic monitoring device in the university complex activated simultaneously. Emergency protocols engaged automatically, as the system detected what it interpreted as a significant structural threat. Across the campus, automated announcements began broadcasting warnings about potential seismic activity. Jake pushed himself back up to the starting position and looked around at his audience with mild concern. Everything okay? You guys look a little freaked out. Tink's forearms were now moving in patterns that suggested either complex calculations or a complete system malfunction. A single repetition of demonstrated exercise generated kinetic force equivalent to small-scale mining operation, requesting immediate evacuation protocols. Professor Vorthak stared at the still blinking seismic warning displays with the expression of someone whose entire worldview was crumbling in real time. His tentacles had begun an involuntary trembling that would later be recognized as the onset of academic post-traumatic stress disorder. Perhaps, he said in a voice that had lost all of its earlier pompous confidence, we should contact the Galactic Safety Committee before proceeding further. Within minutes, the gymnasium was surrounded by emergency response teams, hazmat specialists, and a crowd of increasingly concerned university officials. The Dean of Interspecies Studies arrived wearing full protective gear and carrying equipment designed to contain Class 5 biohazards. What exactly is the nature of the threat? The Dean demanded through his protective suit's communication system. Vorthak gestured weakly toward Jake, who was now stretching casually and completely unaware of the chaos developing around him. The human, Vorthak whispered, performed a push-up. The Dean's protective helmet fogged briefly as he tried to process this information. A push-up caused a campus-wide seismic alert. One push-up, Vorthak confirmed, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone whose fundamental understanding of physics had just been shattered. He says it's basic conditioning. He asked if we wanted to see real exercise. In the background, Jake noticed the growing crowd and waved cheerfully. Hey there, hope I'm not causing any trouble. The professor here wanted to see some human exercises. I was just getting warmed up. The phrase "just getting warmed up" rippled through the assembled emergency responders like a shockwave of pure terror. And that was when someone made the fateful decision to let Jake continue with his demonstration. All right, Jake said, completely oblivious to the fact that he was now surrounded by what appeared to be half the university's emergency response team. If you really want to see a basic human workout, let me show you some burpees. They're great for full-body conditioning. The word burpees would later be added to the Galactic Dictionary of Potentially Hazardous Terms, right between black hole and supernova. Jake dropped into position and began demonstrating what he considered a perfectly normal exercise routine. To the assembled aliens, it looked like a controlled detonation happening in slow motion. Each burpee generated seismic readings that triggered increasingly frantic evacuation protocols. The first 10 repetitions caused the automatic fire suppression system to activate. By the 15th, the university's main power grid had switched to emergency backup systems. At 20, the entire campus had been classified as a potential disaster zone. "This is incredible," gasped Dr. Fleeb, the university's leading expert in xenobiology, as she frantically took readings with equipment that was never designed to measure this level of biological activity. "The energy output per muscle contraction is off our charts. How is his cardiovascular system even functioning under these conditions?" Jake paused after 30 burpees, breathing only slightly harder than when he started. "Okay, that's a decent warm-up. Now let me show you some mountain climbers. These are great for core strength." Jiffy, who had been desperately trying to follow along with Jake's routine, collapsed after the third burpee and was now lying in a twitching heap of overstimulated fur. "Can't feel my tiny legs," he mumbled weakly. "Everything tastes like lightning and regret." Glob had given up all pretense of maintaining his normal shape and was now spread across approximately 15 square feet of gymnasium floor in what appeared to be an existential crisis made manifest. "This is it," he announced to nobody in particular. "This is how the universe ends. Not with a bang, not with a whimper, but with a human doing calisthenics." Tink had reached a state that his manufacturers had never anticipated, complete sensory overload combined with mathematical impossibility. His 4 arms were now moving independently of his central processing unit, apparently trying to calculate energy equations that violated several fundamental laws of physics. "Error, error, error," Tink repeated in an electronic mantra. "Biological organism, exceeding theoretical maximum efficiency by factors of 10,000%, requesting immediate consultation with Galactic Physics Council." Professor Vorthak, meanwhile, had achieved a state of catatonic academic shock. He sat in the corner of the gymnasium, occasionally mumbling phrases like fundamental kinetic principles and impossible energy ratios, while his tentacles twitched spasmodically. Jake, completely unaware of the psychological devastation he was causing, transitioned smoothly into his mountain climber demonstration. Each movement generated readings that the university's instruments interpreted as controlled explosive decompression. "The key is keeping your core tight and maintaining a steady rhythm," Jake explained helpfully as emergency klaxons blared throughout the campus. "You want to feel the burn but not push yourself too hard too fast." The phrase "feel the burn" caused 3 separate emergency response teams to assume they were dealing with some kind of thermal weapon. By this point, the Galactic Emergency Response Team had arrived in full hazmat gear, equipped with containment fields and evacuation shuttles. Their leader, Commander Zark, approached the scene with the kind of caution typically reserved for approaching unstable wormholes. "What is the status of the biological weapon?" Commander Zark demanded through his protective suit's communication system. Dr. Fleeb, who was now taking readings with her 5th set of instruments after the first 4 had suffered complete system failures, looked up with the expression of someone whose understanding of biology had just been fundamentally restructured. "It's not a weapon, Commander," she said in a voice filled with horrified awe. "It's just exercising. This appears to be normal physical conditioning for their species." Commander Zark stared at Jake, who had now moved on to what he called a light CrossFit circuit, and was demonstrating jumping squats that registered on seismic equipment 3 buildings away. "Normal?" Commander Zark repeated weakly. "He says he's out of shape," Dr. Fleeb confirmed. And that was the moment when the Galactic Emergency Response Team decided that maybe they weren't equipped to handle whatever was happening in the physical education complex. Jake finished his set and looked around at the assembled crowd of increasingly panicked aliens with mild concern. "Is everything okay?" You all look kind of stressed. Maybe we should try some yoga to help you relax." The word yoga sent a wave of pure terror through the emergency response teams that would later be studied by xenopsychologists as a textbook example of cross-species trauma response. Jake wiped a small amount of sweat from his forehead with the casual gesture of someone who had just completed a light warm-up, completely unaware that this simple action was being recorded by 17 different scientific instruments and would later be analyzed by the galaxy's leading experts in impossible physics. "That was a pretty good start," he announced cheerfully to his audience of increasingly traumatized aliens and emergency personnel. "But if you really want to see some serious exercise, I could show you guys the real stuff." The phrase "the real stuff" caused Commander Zark to immediately activate his suit's emergency beacon, sending a priority distress signal that would reach the Galactic Safety Council within minutes. "Define real stuff," Dr. Fleeb managed to whisper, though every scientific instinct she possessed was screaming at her not to ask. Jake's face lit up with the kind of enthusiasm that had historically preceded some of humanity's greatest achievements and most spectacular disasters. "Well, there's military training for starters, Navy SEAL conditioning, Marine Corps boot camp, that kind of thing. Or if you want endurance stuff, we could talk about marathons, ultramarathons, Ironman competitions." Tink's audio processors caught the word Ironman and immediately began cross-referencing it with his database of galactic military hardware. The results caused his optical sensors to flicker in patterns that suggested either deep confusion or complete system failure. Requesting clarification, Tink stammered, "Did the human reference competition involving Ferris-based armored combat suits?" "Nah," Jake said with a laugh that somehow managed to be both innocent and absolutely terrifying. "Iron Man is swimming 2.4 miles, biking 112 miles, then running a full marathon. All in one day, without stopping." The silence that followed was the kind of profound quiet that typically occurs just before civilization's collapse. Bob, who had been maintaining his existential crisis in relative silence, suddenly spoke up from his position spread across the gymnasium floor. 2.4 miles of swimming. That's approximately 4 kilometers. Underwater. Without gills. Then 112 miles of locomotion using primitive mechanical devices, Tink added, his voice taking on the electronic equivalent of hysteria. "That's 180 kilometers of sustained mechanical operation." Followed immediately by a marathon, Jiffy whispered from his position of complete exhaustion, "which our database indicates as 42.2 kilometers of sustained high-impact locomotion." "Without stopping," Jake confirmed helpfully. "Though the really hardcore athletes sometimes do it in under 8 hours. At this point, Professor Vorthak achieved what the medical staff would later diagnose as a complete academic breakdown. He began rocking back and forth while muttering calculations that involved impossibly large energy expenditure ratios and theoretical muscle efficiency ratings that violated known biological laws. The university's emergency communication system crackled to life with an announcement that would be remembered throughout galactic history. "Attention all students and faculty. The human exchange student in the physical education complex has been reclassified from harmless primitive to inadvertent weapon of mass destruction. Please maintain a safe distance of no less than 5 kilometers from the gymnasium until further notice." Jake looked around at the chaos with growing concern. "Guys, are you sure you're okay? You're all acting kind of weird. Maybe I should dial it back a bit." The phrase "dial it back" caused every emergency responder present to simultaneously take 3 steps backward. Commander Zark, whose previous experience included containing everything from rogue AI systems to unstable stellar phenomena, found himself completely out of his depth. "What would dialing it back involve?" he asked through his suit's communication system. "Well, I was thinking about demonstrating some burpee box jumps," Jake said thoughtfully, "but maybe we should start with something gentler. How about some basic yoga poses? Downward dog, warrior pose, that kind of thing." The mention of something called warrior pose triggered every combat alert system on the campus simultaneously. Dr. Fleeb, who had been frantically consulting with her colleagues via emergency communication channels, but received a priority message that caused her to go pale beneath her protective equipment. "Jake," she said carefully, "I've just received word from the Galactic Biology Council. They're requesting that you not demonstrate any additional physical activities until we can establish proper safety protocols. Jake looked genuinely concerned for the first time since the demonstration had begun. Safety protocols? Is someone going to get hurt? Because if this is too intense, I can totally show you some beginner stuff instead. The word beginner caused a collective shudder to run through the assembled emergency personnel. The beginner stuff? Commander Zark asked weakly. Would that be less intense than what you've already shown us? Jake nodded earnestly. Oh, absolutely. What I showed you was just basic maintenance stuff. Beginner exercises are way easier. Like walking, light stretching, maybe some gentle swimming. By this point, the Galactic Safety Council had dispatched their most advanced containment team, complete with equipment designed to handle Class 7 existential threats. Their arrival, accompanied by ships that looked more suited to military operations than academic emergencies, finally made Jake realize that something might be seriously wrong. Okay, he said slowly, looking around at what now resembled a full-scale military operation centered entirely on him. I'm starting to think there might be some kind of misunderstanding here. Jake looked around at the assembled fleet of emergency vehicles, the dozens of personnel in hazmat suits, and the hastily erected containment barriers that now surrounded the gymnasium, and finally began to grasp that something had gone terribly wrong. So, he said slowly, addressing the crowd of traumatized aliens and emergency responders, I'm guessing human exercise isn't quite what you guys expected. Dr. Fleeb, who had spent the last hour frantically consulting with every xenobiology expert in 3 spiral arms of the galaxy, stepped forward carefully. Jake, we need to understand something about human physiology. When you say you're out of shape, what exactly do you mean? Jake scratched his head thoughtfully. Well, I mean, I can only run about 6 miles without getting really winded. And I can probably only do like 50 push-ups in a row. You know, basic stuff that shows I haven't been keeping up with my fitness routine. The numbers Jake had just casually mentioned caused Tink's processors to emit a sound that was either advanced calculation or electronic weeping. 50 repetitions, Tink whispered. 50 repetitions of the exercise that triggered campus-wide seismic alerts. And 9.6 kilometers of sustained locomotion as a measure of poor conditioning, Jiffy added from his position of complete physical and emotional exhaustion. Commander Zark, whose experience with crisis management had never prepared him for anything like this, decided to try a different approach. Jake, could you help us understand how humans evolved to be capable of this level of physical activity? Jake settled into what appeared to be a lecture mode, completely unaware that his explanation was being recorded by the galaxy's leading experts in evolutionary biology and would later become required reading in xenobiology programs across known space. Well, Earth is what you might call a challenging environment, he began conversationally. We evolved from persistence hunters, which means we literally ran our prey to death across long distances. Our whole cardiovascular system is built for sustained activity over hours, or even days. Days, Dr. Fleeb managed to whisper. Oh sure, Jake said cheerfully. Humans regularly participate in multi-day endurance events. There are ultramarathons that go for weeks. And that's just recreational stuff. Our military personnel train under conditions that would make today's little workout look like a relaxing afternoon. Professor Vorthak, who had been catatonic for the past hour, suddenly stood up with the jerky movements of someone whose worldview had been completely reconstructed. A little workout, he repeated in a voice that sounded like it was coming from somewhere far away. He called it a little workout. Jake noticed the professor's distress and tried to be helpful. Hey, Professor, don't feel bad about not being able to keep up. I could design a beginner program for you guys. We'll start really easy. Maybe some light walking, basic stretching, gentle calisthenics. The phrase gentle calisthenics caused every emergency responder present to involuntarily step backward. Dr. Fleeb quickly intervened before Jake could elaborate on what he considered gentle. Jake, I think what we need to do is establish some new protocols for human-alien exercise interaction. Within hours, the Galactic Safety Council had established what would become known throughout the galaxy as the Martinez Protocol. A comprehensive set of guidelines for managing interactions with human physical conditioning activities. The protocol included requirements for seismic monitoring, structural reinforcement, emergency medical personnel, and mandatory evacuation procedures for any facility where humans might engage in what they considered normal exercise. Jake was also inadvertently responsible for the creation of the galaxy's first extreme fitness warning system, a network of sensors and alerts designed to detect when humans were engaged in physical activities that might pose a threat to local infrastructure or alien psychology. The 3 alien students eventually recovered from their ordeal, though Jiffy never quite regained his original hyperactive energy levels. Glob developed a permanent pessimistic streak that made his previous negativity look optimistic by comparison. And Tink required a complete personality backup restoration after his processors became convinced that mathematics itself was unreliable. Professor Vorthak took an extended sabbatical to rethink his entire approach to physical education and was last seen working on a thesis titled The Theoretical Impossibility of Human Kinetic Energy Output and Why Everything I Thought I Knew About Physics Was Wrong. As the emergency teams finally began packing up their equipment and the campus slowly returned to normal, Jake looked around at the aftermath of what he still considered a pretty light workout session. "So," he said to Dr. Fleeb, who had become the de facto liaison for all human-related incidents, "same time tomorrow? I was thinking we could try some yoga. It's really relaxing, and I know you guys seemed pretty stressed today." The word relaxing in connection with anything Jake might do caused Dr. Fleeb to immediately activate her emergency communication device and to request a priority consultation with the Galactic Stress Management Council. And that was how Jake Martinez, a perfectly ordinary human college student who just wanted to pass gym class, accidentally became the galaxy's first officially designated inadvertent weapons system and the subject of approximately 4,000 research papers on the theoretical limits of biological impossibility. But he still needed those gym credits to graduate.